Let's go on now to this fight over representation, how it came about and what it means for airline mechanics. Steve?
Well, actually, I think that's a good question, and there's an entry point to that most people, I don't believe, really understand. Because of these mergers that are taking place, and it's a big in conversation in the media today about these mergers. A lot of unions, all unions, are concerned about losing their membership due to a merger. If you merge with Delta Airlines, for example, in our craft, they're non-union, and we could lose our representation simply by that merger. I believe what happened with the Teamsters is there was the U.S. Air America West merger. The Teamsters represented the America West mechanics and related, and actually lost them to the representation, or because of the merger, they lost representation rights. Having just experienced that, they looked at the rest of the landscape and said, we're vulnerable at other places too, particularly United. And so they began to collect representation cards at United Airlines, hoping that if there was a merger between Continental and United, there would be an election so that at least they'd have a fighting chance. I believe that they got a better response than they expected, because like you mentioned earlier, Steve, all airline workers are beat up. They've had defeat after defeat, disappointment, promises made that were broken, pensions lost, all of these things. Well, when the Teamsters come and say, hey, we're the white knight, we can fix your problems, we're Mr. Clean, we know how to fix all these problems for you. Our guys like to hear that, because everybody wants to have the white knight ride into town and slay the dragon. The only problem is, the Teamsters are a labor organization that has a history, that has been out there. Obviously all unions I support. I think it's important that all working men and all union men and women support each other. But we have a track record, the Teamsters have a track record, and I believe once our guys realize that the Teamsters really don't have a magic bullet, or they don't have the white knight that's going to come and slay the United Dragon, I think they're going to begin to realize that there's a lot of political rhetoric that's been thrown out there, a lot of campaigning, and that the fact is that the Teamsters can't do any better at their carriers. Look at Continental, look at...
Well, Kurt, why don't you talk about the airlines where Teamsters do represent mechanics? I mean, what's happened at these airlines?
Okay, currently right now the biggest carrier that they represent is Continental Airlines. And just recently they have come to us and they have asked us to possibly represent them also. So we're kind of in a crisscross situation right here. Besides that, they also work for Frontier, which is a smaller regional airline. And then you've also got, at one point, interesting enough, they represented our Southwest airline mechanics for a period of time. And during that time, there was some outsourcing issues that had come up, so that they had allowed some outsourcing within the United States here. And so anyways, in 2003, the mechanics there, the problem with the Teamsters was they were not focused on our issues, on the mechanics issues. It was kind of a homogenous pod and everybody. So what happened within 3 weeks, Steve, and usually these things take a year, or the Teamsters right now, it's taken them 2 years to do this card drive. These guys in 3 weeks got all their cards signed and started the process, and they overthrew the Teamsters at Southwest Airlines.
So they joined AMFA.
Yes.
Now, why would the workers decide that they're going to leave a major union, and the Teamsters is one of the largest unions in the country, and join a smaller union like AMFA? Why would they make that decision?
Precisely because of our focus.
Yeah, and it's simple to me. The Teamsters, they preach democracy. They say that they have all this. However, they've got a lot of issues with that. In fact, they have the government overseeing them because they weren't giving people free elections. They weren't addressing the people's issues as they said that they would.
Well, how is your union, say, structurally different than the Teamsters?
Well, our union is bottom up.
What does that mean?
It comes the membership, the locals.
Well, what does that mean? Because they would say they're bottom up too. Steve?
There are some real significant differences. Let's talk about bottom up. Let's start at the top and work down. I'm the national director of AMFA. I'm the highest elected officer in our union. Our members, if they chose to remove me from office, they decided that I wasn't representing their best interest, I was doing a lousy job. All they would have to do is get 3 of our locals together to sign a petition to begin the recall. that vote would now go out to the full membership, and they would vote on whether or not to retain me as the national director.
So you're subject to recall by the membership in the middle of your term.
Absolutely. And the Teamsters, you cannot touch Jimmy Hoffa. You cannot, and it doesn't matter whether it was Jimmy Hoffa or anybody else.
Well, the regional director of the Teamsters, the transportation department, or the airline division of the Teamsters, is he elected, he or she elected?
I believe that they're elected. They're also can be appointed.
By the rank and file?
I don't believe that they are. They're appointed by, by the executive boards. But I'll be honest with you, I don't know a lot about the Teamsters' internal structure. The things that I do know about AMFA, I know are unique in the industry. It doesn't matter which union you're talking about in aviation. There are some other things that are very unique about our organization. For example, our dues structure. Most of our dues go to the locals. Now the Teamsters have made the claim that AMFA is broke and the National doesn't have that much money. We have plenty of money, but the difference is our members are at the local, and that's where their money needs to be working for them. And so if you look at our LM2 sheets and LM3s, you're going to find out that the locals are very well positioned. Their finances are in great shape. They've got most of the money, and we're structured that way. Another example that's very unique within our organization is that our wages are structured and linked directly to our members' well-being. If they get a raise, national officers get a raise. If our members take a concession, if they take a pay cut, our wages well, not immediately, but within the next pay cycle, within a couple of months, our wages are adjusted downward. There is no other union that I know of on the planet that would take a pay cut. Their officers would take a pay cut because their members had to take a pay cut.
That's a radical difference from most unions in this country.
It is, and AMFA is very unique in in a lot of situations, and I could go on, but we're limited in time.
Well, the transparency that you're talking about, it seems like you don't have that transparency in other unions. Is that a reason people should stay with your union, for example?
It's a major reason, but this really goes to the heart of unionism today, why we're experiencing the problem we are, is that in order to have those things benefit you as a union member, you have to participate. If you're going to sit on the sidelines, if you're going to be a spectator to your own union advocacy, it doesn't matter who represents you, really. Because if you're not going to take the advantage of being able to hold your officers accountable, if you're not going to go to your negotiations, actually be able to observe the company.
And you have that right to go to your negotiations?
Absolutely. At Northwest Airlines in 2001, when we negotiated our first contract, we had 25 seats available at every negotiation, not just some of them.
I don't think the employers like that, do they?
The employers didn't like it at all, but here's another thing that people need to understand. We had just won the representation election at Northwest between the IAM and AMFA, and we had won, and we had won very soundly. Northwest had their executive labor officers at the count, and they were counting. They wanted to see how much interest there was in the union vote. When they saw that 96% of our members had voted for a union, they knew they were in trouble. And that's why they allowed our members to sit at the table, to sit in the room and to be able to observe. One of the first things Northwest tried to do was take away our closed shop, our union security. They said, well, we're going to acknowledge all the rest of the contract, but we're not going to acknowledge that piece of it. What we told them was, that's going to be a big mistake, because our members are not going to appreciate the very first thing that you do is to attack their union. You just saw what happened in the organization and the representation election. They said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll think about it. 2 hours later, they called us back and said, we've changed our mind. We're going to recognize the union security. That's the power that workers have, but they have to get involved in their own unions. They have to get involved in their advocacy. And if you think a union, changing unions and bringing in a new set of officers and new rules is going to make any difference, it may make a little difference, and in some cases it'll be worse. The only real difference is that American workers have to stand up for themselves, they have to get into the fight, and they have to push back against the government and the corporations who have had their way with us for decades.